Today our topic is solving polynomial equations, our learning target. How can I solve polynomial equations in factored form? Zero product property. Let a and b be real numbers. If a times b equals 0, then a equals 0 or b equals 0. That's just saying that if you're multiplying two numbers, one of them has to be 0 in order to make the outcome 0. 5 times 0 equals 0. Or 0 times 5 equals 0. But one of the numbers has to be 0 in order to make that product 0. Factored form polynomial equation. Here's an example of that. Factored form just means we have two factors. Both of these in parentheses are called factors. It's factor times a factor equals your product. And this product is 0. Solutions to zero product equation are also called roots. So the solution to that equation would be your solution or your roots. So for an example, solve x minus 4 times x minus 2 equals 0. Based on the zero product property, one of our factors has to equal 0 in order for this product to be 0. So either x minus 4 has to equal 0, or x plus 2 has to equal 0. We're going to solve both of these equations. Add 4 to both sides. We get x equals 4. And subtract 2 from both sides. X equals negative 2. So we have two solutions. So we write that x equals negative 2, comma 4. The standard is to write your answer from least to greatest. So put the least number first, negative 2, and then put your greater number second, 4. Key term, greatest common factor. Our definition for that is the greatest factor that divides two numbers. So it's really what number can evenly go into both the numbers. So for our example, we want to factor out, so take out, the greatest common monomial factor. So if we look at 12x and 42y, we want to know what can go into both of those. They can both have 2, but there's a bigger number. 6 would be the greatest number that goes into both 12 and 42. Because 12 equals 6 times 2, and 42 equals 6 times 7. So we want to take that 6 out. So we're thinking backwards distribution. So we want to take the 6 out and multiply inside by what's left. So when we take 6 away from 12, we're left with 2. But it has an x, so we are left with 2x. Plus, when we take 6 away from 42, we're left with 7, and there's a y. So if we were to distribute, we should get back to what we started with, 12x plus 42y. If we give that 6 to the 2x, we would get 12x, and you give the 6 to the 7y, we would get 42y. So when we do backwards distribution, that's called factoring. We're putting it into a product, something that's being multiplied. We're going to do the same thing for b. Factor out. So let's just start with the numbers. What can it go into both 4 and 24? Well, the answer would be 4. But then we also have the same variable, x and x. So what goes into x to the 4th power and x to the 3rd power? It's going to be x to the 3rd power. It's going to be your smallest power. So if we look 4 and 3, 3 is the smaller one. So we would take out x to the third. And we can say that because if I say 4x to the fourth times is equal to 4x to the third times x. So we take out that factor of 4x to the third. And then 24x to the third equals 4x to the third times 6. We have that factor of 4x to the third. So when we take out that factor 4x to the third, we have to write down what we have left over, which is x plus 6. So that would be written in factored form. We take out whatever we can. So now we're going to use this process to solve equations. We want to factor first and then solve the equation. So we have to factor 2x squared and 8x. So we can take out a 2 from both 2 and 8, and we can take out 1x. So we can take out a 2 and take out an x. What do we have left when we take out a 2 and an x? Well, 2x times x would give us 2x squared. Plus, when we take out a 2 and an x from 8, we're left with 4 equals 0. So again, you should be able to distribute and get back to the original equation. Now that we're in factored form, we can use our zero product property. 2x equals 0 and x plus 4 equals 0. Solve the equations. Divide by 2 on both sides. We get x equals 0 divided by 2 is 0. For this equation, subtract 4 on both sides. We get x equals negative 4. So our answers would be negative 4 and 0. Again, we write them from least to greatest. For our second equation, you notice that it's not equal to 0. So the first step that we need to do is make it equal to 0 by subtracting 15n. 6n squared minus 15n equals 0. Now that it's set equal to 0, we can factor. What can we take out of 6n squared and 15n? Start with your numbers. We can take out a 3 from both. And from n squared and n, we can take out at least one n. Because they both have one n, the first one just has two n's. So we can take out 3n. And then what do we have left? From 6n squared, we have a 2 to make 6 and another n to make the n squared. Minus 15n, we have a 5 left over to make 3 times 5, 15, and we don't have any n's left because we took one away. That's equal to 0. Now, using our zero product property, we can say 3n equals 0 and 2n minus 5 equals 0. Solve both equations, divide by 3, n equals 0, and add 5 to both sides. 2n equals 5, divide by 2, n equals 5 over 2. So our solution would be n equals 0, 5 over 2. The last piece is this vertical motion model. You might recognize this from that Mastery Connect final that we took, this form. But this tells us the height, h, in feet of a projectile, so its height at any given time, is modeled by this equation, where t is the time, so t is time in seconds. The object has been in the air. V is the initial vertical velocity, this v right here, initial vertical velocity, and s is the initial height, So in our example, a startled armadillo jumps straight into the air with an initial vertical velocity of 14 feet per second. After how many seconds does it land on the ground? Well, let's just give ourselves a nice image here. If we have an armadillo here on the ground is 0 feet. That's 0 feet. We're not up in the air, we're not below sea level, we're at 0 feet. So he's starting right here. Then he jumps in the air, and then he comes down. And then he's going to land on the ground. So if we're looking at this, his height, h, is equal to negative 16 t squared plus our velocity, 14 t, plus s, his initial height. Well, his initial height is 0. He started on the ground. 0. We want to know after how many seconds right here, so we're solving for t, does he land on the ground? So we want to know after how long does it take for his height to get back to 0? How long is he in the air? Well, we have 0 equals negative 16t squared plus 14t. We don't really need that plus 0 because that doesn't add anything to it. We have an equation set equal to 0. We need to factor this. Take out a factor from each of our terms to put it into factored form. So we have 0 equals, what can we take out of negative 16 and 14? We can take out a 2. From t squared and t, we can take out a t. What do we have left over? Negative 8 times 2 would give us negative 16, and t times t would give us t squared, plus 14t, we would have a 7 left over because 2t times 7 equals 14t. Now we can use our zero product property. 2t equals 0. Negative 8t plus 7 equals 0. And get our solutions for t. Divide both sides by 2 here. We get t equals 0. Subtract 7 from both sides. We get negative 8t equals negative 7. Divide by negative 8 on both sides. T equals 7 over 8. Now, for this one, since it's a real life situation, we have to pick the answer that makes sense. Would it make sense for him to be in the air for 0 seconds? If you jump in the air, you're not in the air for 0 seconds. That's impossible. So this answer does not make sense. So we could be in the air for 7/8 of a second. So he wasn't in the air for very long, but he was in the air for just a little bit. That's all the notes that I have for you today. Thank you for watching my video, and please remember to take your video notes quiz.